My sister became jealous when I had twins, asked to adopt one. I said no, then she went too far and I had to call the police. If someone had told me a year ago that my own sister, the person I grew up trusting more than anyone, would betray me in a way I never imagined, I wouldn't have believed them. If they had told me she would look me in the eyes with the same love and warmth I had known since childhood, and then, without hesitation, try to rip apart my family, I would have called it impossible. But the thing about betrayal, it never comes from enemies. And I learned that the hard way. Growing up, my sister Mia and I were inseparable. Two halves of the same whole, or at least that's what we used to say. She was my best friend, my partner in crime, my secret keeper. We shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams of the future. Our parents would always joke about how we were like twins born 2 years apart, so close in heart and mind that we might as well have been born at the same time. And for the longest time, that felt true. We had our childhood arguments, sure, bickering over stolen clothes or who got the bigger slice of cake, but nothing serious. Nothing that made me doubt that, no matter what, she would always be there for me. But adulthood has a way of changing people. And the sister I thought I knew, she disappeared the moment life became unfair to her. My life took off the way I had always dreamed. I built a career as an interior designer, something I had worked tirelessly for. I met and married Ryan, an incredible man who worked as a doctor, someone who supported me, loved me deeply, and built a life with me that felt almost too good to be true. And then, after years of love, laughter, and planning for the future, we welcomed our twin boys, Leo and Oliver. It was everything I had ever wanted, everything I had dreamed of. Sure, it was exhausting. Nights without sleep, bottles and diapers scattered everywhere, my body aching from the constant demands of motherhood. But I had never felt so fulfilled. Every time I looked at their tiny faces, every time they wrapped their tiny fingers around mine, I knew I would go through every hardship in the world just to see them smile. But Mia's life wasn't going the way she had planned. She had been trying for years to have a baby with her husband, Alex. 5 years of hope, heartbreak, miscarriages, fertility treatments that drained them emotionally and financially. I had watched her go through every stage of grief, anger, sadness, resignation. And then, just as she seemed to be coming to terms with the possibility that she might never have children, I got pregnant with twins. It wasn't fair. I knew that. She knew that. And no matter how hard she tried to hide it, I saw the jealousy in her eyes when I announced the pregnancy. I saw the way she clutched Alex's hand too tightly, the way her smile trembled at the edges, the way she blinked too much, like she was holding back tears she refused to shed in front of me. I told myself she just needed time, that she would come around. And for a while, it seemed like she had. When the twins were born, Mia was right there in the hospital, smiling, congratulating me, holding them with a look of wonder on her face. "They're beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "So lucky. 2 perfect boys." Her hands trembled as she stroked Leo's tiny fingers, and I remember thinking it was just overwhelming for her, seeing the life I had when she had been fighting for something similar for so long. But I never thought she would take it this far. At first, the changes in her were subtle. Little comments. "Wow, must be exhausting with twins. Maybe you should have just had one. You don't even get to sleep. Are you sure you can handle 2 babies? It's crazy how some people struggle to have just one, and others just get 2 handed to them." I let it go. I knew she was hurting. I knew how much she wanted to be a mother, how much she had been through. I told myself it wasn't personal, that she wasn't trying to be cruel. But then, it wasn't just comments. She started correcting me all the time. "You're not holding him right. You should burp him more often. Are you sure you know what you're doing? You let them cry too long. You have to comfort them faster, or they won't feel safe." It got to the point where she would physically take Leo out of my arms without asking, rocking him like she was his mother, whispering things to him in a soft, desperate voice. And the worst part? She ignored Oliver. She barely acknowledged my other son. It was always Leo she gravitated toward, always Leo she insisted on holding, always Leo she called her little guy. It made me uncomfortable. I told Ryan about it, but he brushed it off at first, saying Mia was just struggling, that it wasn't malicious. And I wanted to believe that. I really, really did. But then she crossed a line I never thought she would even think about. One night, after a family dinner, when Ryan had taken the boys upstairs to get them ready for bed, Mia pulled me aside. Her hands were shaking. Her face was pale. "I need to ask you something serious," she said. I frowned, already feeling uneasy. "Okay." She took a deep breath, like she was trying to gather the courage to say whatever was on her mind. "I want to adopt Leo." The room spun. For a second, I actually thought I had misheard her, that my exhaustion was playing tricks on me. "What? Mia, that's not funny." But she wasn't laughing. She was looking at me with wide, desperate eyes, tears brimming at the edges. "Please," she whispered. "I need this." "Why Leo?" I managed to say, my voice shaking. "Why not adopt another child? There are so many kids who need a home." She shook her head fiercely, frustration and anguish tightening her face. "You don't get it. I want family. I need someone who shares our blood. Someone who looks like us, feels like ours. Please, you have two. You can have more. Just give me Leo, and it would be like he was always mine." I stepped back like she had slapped me. My own sister. Absolutely not. My voice was shaking. "Mia, I love you, but what you're asking is insane." She collapsed then, sobbing, her whole body trembling. She wailed, "It's not fair. Why do you get two? Why do you get to be a mom and I don't?" Ryan heard the commotion and came running. The second I told him what she had said, his entire demeanor changed. His usual calm, patient face hardened. "You need to leave, Mia." His voice was like ice. She begged. She pleaded. But Ryan stood firm. "You are never asking that again. Get out." That night, I realized something terrifying. Mia wasn't just jealous. She was obsessed, and she wasn't going to let this go. After that night, I convinced myself that cutting back on contact would be enough. That Mia would realize how inappropriate her request had been, feel ashamed, and let go of whatever delusion had taken root in her mind. I wanted to believe she would snap out of it, that it had been a moment of weakness brought on by years of grief and disappointment, that she would take a step back, work through her emotions, and eventually be the sister I had always known again. But some things don't just go away. At first, she seemed to accept the distance. For a few weeks, she barely reached out. No texts, no random visits, no calls just to check in. It felt like a relief, like things were settling down. But a part of me, the part that had started to understand that something was deeply wrong, knew it was too quiet. Mia wasn't the type to back off so easily. And sure enough, the silence didn't last. It started small. A message here and there, asking how the twins were, if they were sleeping better, if I needed any help. It was all normal enough, the kind of thing any concerned aunt would ask, but the frequency picked up. Soon, she was texting every day. If I didn't respond right away, she would send follow-ups, casual at first, then increasingly desperate. I told Ryan about it one night, scrolling through the endless messages on my phone. He frowned, but reassured me that it was just Mia struggling with her emotions. That maybe, in her own twisted way, she was trying to make amends for what she had said. I tried to believe that, but there was something unsettling about the way she fixated on Leo. She rarely asked about Oliver. When I mentioned him in my responses, she didn't acknowledge it. It was as if, in her mind, I only had one son. The thought made my stomach turn. Then came the unannounced visits. She started showing up at my house unexpectedly, always with some excuse. She was just in the area, or she had picked up something cute for the babies. The first couple of times, I let her in because I didn't want to be cruel. She was still my sister, and despite everything, I didn't want to believe she was truly capable of harming me or my family. But every visit felt off. She would go straight to Leo, picking him up without asking, cradling him against her chest, whispering to him softly. It was more than just affectionate. It was possessive. When I tried to take him back, she would hesitate, holding on just a little too long before reluctantly handing him over. I started making excuses not to let her in. Told her I was busy, that the boys were napping, that I just wasn't up for visitors. The more I refused, the more persistent she became. One day, I caught her standing outside the house. She wasn't knocking, wasn't calling, just standing there, staring at the window where the twins' playpen was visible. When I opened the door, startled and unsettled, she acted like it was normal. Said she had just been about to ring the doorbell. I lied and told her we were heading out. After that, I told Ryan that we needed to set firm boundaries. No more visits unless planned. No more texting back and forth all day. He agreed, though I could tell he still didn't think it was as serious as I did. But I knew, deep in my gut, that Mia wasn't letting this go. And I was right, because when subtle tactics didn't work, she escalated. One evening, as I was feeding the twins, my phone rang. It was Alex, Mia's husband. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks, but the second I picked up, I could hear the tension in his voice. He asked if Mia was with me. Confused, I told him no. He let out a sharp breath, muttering something under his breath, and then asked if I had seen her at all that day. I told him I hadn't. Then he told me she had left the house hours ago and wasn't answering her phone, that she had been acting strange lately, more withdrawn, more erratic. A chill ran down my spine. I told him that if she showed up at my house, I would let him know. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was about to happen. I kept glancing at the windows, checking the locks, listening for any unusual sounds. Ryan told me I was being paranoid. Ryan, though concerned, tried to calm me down. He reminded me that Alex had spoken to Mia, that she hadn't contacted us since. He said she was probably ashamed, that she had just been caught up in emotions and had finally realized how far she had gone. And then, as if the universe was trying to prove him right, Mia called. Her voice was soft, almost timid, so unlike the desperation and anger that had seeped into her words the last time we had spoken. She started with an apology, not just for what she had done, but for everything. For the passive-aggressive comments, for making me uncomfortable, for pressuring me. That she had no right to act the way she had, and she completely understood if I never wanted to speak to her again. But she missed me. She missed being my sister. And, above all, she wanted to apologize in person. I should have said no. I should have trusted my gut, the warning signs still flashing in my head. But the thing about Mia was that she knew how to get to me. She knew that, despite everything, I still wanted to believe she was the sister I had loved my whole life. That I wanted to believe in redemption, in forgiveness. So I agreed. When she arrived at my house later that week, she looked different, smaller somehow, as if the weight of her guilt had physically shrunk her. Her usual carefully done hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal. She looked tired, but for the first time in a long time, she looked normal. She didn't try to touch the twins right away. She stayed on the couch, hands folded in her lap, eyes wet with remorse. She didn't push, didn't ask to hold Leo, didn't make any strange remarks. Instead, she talked. She told me about therapy, about how she had been forced to face the ugliness of her jealousy, how she had realized that she had been so focused on what she didn't have that she stopped seeing what she did. She told me she wasn't asking for things to go back to how they were overnight, but she just wanted to be a part of my life again. I listened, my guard still up, but softening. When the twins woke up from their nap, I braced myself for something, some look, some lingering hesitation. But she was careful. She greeted both boys equally, asked about Oliver just as much as Leo, didn't push to hold either of them. She was trying, and against my better judgment, I let myself believe it. For the next few weeks, things felt normal again. She didn't overstep. She didn't show up unannounced. She checked in, but only occasionally, never overbearing. We started talking more, and slowly, I started trusting her again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt relieved. I should have known. I should have realized that it was all a lie. Because behind that mask of repentance, behind every carefully chosen word, Mia had been planning something. Something I never could have imagined. The day started like any other. Ryan and I both had a busy day at work. Since I was easing back into projects, I had scheduled a client meeting that would take a few hours. Ryan, always juggling a million things at the hospital, had a long shift ahead. We arranged for our nanny, Angela, to watch the twins. Angela had been with us since the beginning. She was reliable, loving, practically family. I never once doubted that the boys were safe in her care. But few hours later, my phone rang. It was Angela. The second I answered, I knew something was wrong. Her voice was frantic, almost incoherent. She kept saying she was sorry, that she didn't know, that she never should have let Mia in. My blood ran cold. Then the words hit me like a freight train. Leo was gone. I barely remember driving home. I don't even remember grabbing my things, rushing out of the office, running to my car. My body moved on autopilot, my heart hammering so hard I thought I would pass out. When I got there, the house was chaos. Angela was sobbing, trying to explain. Mia had arrived, acting completely normal, greeting both babies, chatting casually. She had stayed for nearly an hour, playing with them, helping with their bottles. She had been fine. In general, Angela knew Mia, but she did not know the details about Mia. Then, when Angela went to the bathroom for just a minute, Mia took Leo and walked out the front door. By the time Angela realized he was missing, Mia was already gone. I could barely breathe. Ryan arrived moments later, his face pale, his hands shaking. At first I called Mia incessantly, but her phone was turned off. Then I called Alex. Where is she? Where's my son? Alex was equally shocked. He had no idea that Mia had done this. I told him everything in a rush. How Mia had come to the house, how she had waited for Angela to be distracted, how she had stolen Leo and disappeared. My voice was shrill, high-pitched, almost unrecognizable, but I didn't care. Alex swore, loudly, viciously, then told me that Mia had been acting strange all week. She had been distant, distracted, spending long hours out of the house without saying where she was going. He had thought maybe she was just struggling with everything, that maybe she was overwhelmed by guilt. But now, hearing the full extent of what she had done, he sounded just as frantic as I felt. He promised he would check everywhere, that he would call her over and over until she picked up. Then we called the police. Officers filled the house, asking questions, trying to piece together everything. They asked if Mia had shown any signs of instability before this, if she had made threats. I told them everything. Every single red flag, every warning sign I had ignored. And all I could think, over and over again, was that this was my fault. I had let her back in. I had let my guard down. And now, my baby was gone. The longest hours of my life had just begun. The house felt like it was caving in around me. The air was too thick, too hot, too suffocating. My ears were ringing, my heartbeat thunderous, drowning out everything else. I could barely focus on the frantic voices of the officers asking me questions, could barely form words in response. Leo was gone. Mia had taken my baby. My mind couldn't wrap around the reality of it. It felt like a nightmare, like one of those horrifying dreams where you're screaming, but no sound comes out, where your legs are moving, but you're not getting anywhere. But this wasn't a dream. This was real. Ryan stood beside me, pale and stiff as a corpse, his grip on his phone so tight I thought it might shatter in his hands. He was trying to stay calm, trying to answer the officer's questions with measured words, but I could see the cracks forming. His fingers were trembling. He kept running his hand through his hair, his doctor's mind working through the situation like a crisis in the ER. But this wasn't a patient he could save with quick thinking and steady hands. This was our son, and he was gone. Angela was still sobbing, her face buried in her hands. She kept repeating that she was sorry, that she had only left for a minute, that she never should have trusted Mia. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that I was the one who had let Mia back into our lives, but I couldn't get the words out. My throat was raw, like I had been screaming for hours even though I hadn't made a sound. The police were already moving fast. One officer was on the phone, coordinating with the team handling the Amber Alert. Another was taking down every detail we could give about Mia, what she was wearing, the car she drove, any possible places she could have taken Leo. She had planned this. She had been waiting for the perfect moment. This wasn't just a random act of desperation. This was an obsession. Ryan asked the officers about next steps, and his voice was firm and controlled. The lead investigator, a woman in her 40s with a sharp look and a calm demeanor, explained the next steps and noted that they had already recorded her license plate and would be monitoring any activity on her credit cards. It had already been hours. Mia had a head start. She could be anywhere. I felt like I was going to throw up. Ryan stood in front of me, gripping my hands so tightly that it almost hurt. He was saying my name, telling me that we would find Leo, that Mia wouldn't get away with this. But the look in his eyes told me he was barely holding on himself. The weight was unbearable. Every second felt like an eternity, stretching into an endless, suffocating void where all I could do was sit and imagine the worst. Then, finally, an officer stepped forward. The entire room seemed to still, the air heavy with anticipation. He looked directly at me, his expression unreadable, but I already knew before he spoke. They had found them. I sucked in a sharp breath, my heart slamming against my ribs. I wanted to speak, but my throat had closed up. Ryan got the words out first, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where is he?" The officer explained that Mia had been found outside the city, in a small, secluded hotel near a highway. She had used a fake name to check in, but surveillance cameras had picked up her car in the parking lot. The hotel staff hadn't even realized anything was wrong. Mia had walked in calmly, carrying Leo, acting like just another exhausted mother checking in for the night. I didn't even wait for the officer to finish. I was already moving, already grabbing my keys, my bag, anything I could get my hands on. Ryan caught my wrist before I could bolt out the door. His grip was strong, but his voice was gentle. "Let them handle it. We can't just show up there. We have to wait." Wait. I was supposed to wait while my sister, my own sister, was alone with my son in some motel room? I want to scream. The lead officer must have seen the sheer panic on my face because he quickly reassured me that a team was already there. Mia had been confronted. She wasn't resisting, wasn't fighting, but she was refusing to leave the room. She was holding on to Leo. I barely heard the rest of his words over the pounding in my head. They didn't want to escalate the situation. They needed to be careful. They didn't want her to panic and do something drastic. Minutes stretched into an eternity. And then, finally, another officer got a call. His eyes flickered with something. Relief? Confirmation? I couldn't tell. He nodded once, then turned to us. Leo was safe. They had him, and Mia was in custody. I didn't think. I didn't ask. I just ran. Ryan was right behind me, but I barely noticed him. I didn't care about the officers shouting for me to slow down, to let them lead the way. I didn't care about anything except reaching my baby. The drive to the station was a blur. I barely felt the road beneath us, barely registered Ryan's hands gripping the wheel like a vice. I just kept picturing Leo, frightened, confused, searching for me. And then suddenly, we were there. The moment we stepped into the station, I saw him. Leo, wrapped in a small blanket, cradled in the arms of a female officer. He looked unharmed, but his little face was red, his eyes puffy from crying. The second he saw me, his tiny arms reached out, his sobs turning into frantic wails. I was sobbing into his curls, whispering over and over again that I was here, that everything was okay, that he was safe now. I barely felt Ryan kneel beside us, his arms wrapping around both of us, his forehead pressed against mine. Leo was back, but I couldn't even fully process the relief before another presence in the room made my blood turn to ice. Mia. She was sitting in a chair off to the side, hands cuffed in her lap, flanked by two officers, and she was staring directly at me. For a long, horrible moment, we just looked at each other. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't even ashamed. She just looked calm, as if she hadn't just ripped my world apart, as if she hadn't just stolen my child. I had always thought that when this moment came, if it ever came, I would have something to say, some speech filled with rage, or grief, or betrayal. Something that could pour out all the pain she had caused me in a single breath. But as I sat there, clutching Leo so tightly that he let out a soft, tired whimper, I realized I had no words left. No breath, no strength. Mia was gone. What sat in front of me now was someone else entirely. Someone I didn't recognize. Ryan must have sensed that I was seconds away from losing it because he placed a firm hand on my back, his touch grounding me just enough to keep me from spiraling. His voice was low, controlled, but filled with something sharp and dangerous. He asked the officers what would happen next. One of them, the lead investigator who had been at our house earlier, stepped forward. She explained that Mia would be detained for interrogation. I forced myself to stand, shifting Leo in my arms so I could hold him closer. My legs felt like they were made of lead, every step toward the exit slow and heavy. As I passed by Mia, I made the mistake of looking at her one last time. Her eyes, dark and unreadable, locked onto mine. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't apologizing. I turned away and walked out of the station without another glance. I didn't care what happened to Mia anymore. I didn't care if she cried, if she begged, if she screamed for me to understand. She had taken my son. She had broken something between us that could never be repaired. Mia was my sister by blood, but after this, she was nothing to me. The next few days passed in a blur. Police officers came and went, asking more questions, filling out reports. Family and friends called nonstop, some offering their support, others wanting to know what the hell had happened. I didn't answer most of them. I didn't have the energy to explain. Mia remained in custody, but Alex called me once, telling me that she was being transferred to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. I didn't ask for details. I didn't care. Mia's fate was no longer my concern. My only concern now was my family. My real family. The one she had almost destroyed. I wasn't sure if I would ever be okay again. But as I stood in the nursery that night, watching Leo and Oliver sleep soundly in their cribs, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never let Mia, or anyone else, take away what was mine. Not now. Not ever.